Crimson Crossover Network. This is The Tide Machine with Charles Branch and Michael Southern. Welcome back to The Tide Machine. I am Charles Branch with Michael Southern. Michael, we're just going to jump straight into it this week. Big win on Saturday down in Athens, and I just want to go ahead and get straight into it. Share your thoughts, what you feeling. How was your Saturday watching Alabama play Georgia?
Well, like most everybody, a little bit stressful. Really enjoyed the first half. Things really got even more tight in the second. But for me, the bigger picture on this whole outcome, yes, people can say Georgia has an Alabama problem, but for this current coaching staff, that was their biggest win to date. They really needed that. They needed to show that they could go on the road in a hostile environment, execute like they did, and come away with a win. Now, history will determine how this plays out for the rest of the season, but who knows? This could be like we talked about last week in 2008 when Alabama set the tone in that season by really going over there and hammering Georgia and taking control in the first half. Now, these are not vintage Alabama and Georgia teams that maybe we're used to seeing 10 years ago, but it's still a significant win. And in today's era of college football, Georgia's still a good team, Alabama's a good team, and that's still a hard place to play.
It's surprising to me since 2008 how many of these games have really come down to one play, and it may not necessarily be the last play of the game. It may be something that happened early on. I talked about last week when we were in Athens in 2008, and Glenn Coffey fumbles the ball on the screen pass, but Georgia roughs John Parker Wilson. So that first drive, we get to keep the ball, get a first down inside the 10, and eventually score a touchdown. That could have completely changed the game, and we may not be talking about the blackout like we do now. Or you go back to 2012, where I think Georgia made the right play trying to hit their receiver in the flat, but we tipped the ball, which messes up his timing. He catches it in bounds, and the clock runs out. Or you think about 2015, where we blocked the punt and return it for a touchdown. Thinking about last year, Ryan Williams's touchdown catch right after Georgia, scores to take the lead. Thinking about 2018, where they decide to try the fake punt with Justin Fields. There's just this critical play that Alabama has made, or Georgia has, just been unable to make it or fall apart. And the play that gets the most scrutiny, I feel like, from last week was the play LT Overton made on the 4th and 1, where a lot of people are questioning why Kirby just didn't kick the field goal, tie up the game. As I saw it, I thought we were outflanked. I thought it was they called the right play, and luckily for us, LT Overton just made a great play on the Georgia running back, and luckily we were able to get out of there and finish it. But it's incredible how many of these games have really come down to one crucial play at one moment in the game, and Alabama has typically come out on top of that basically 9 times out of 10, it feels like.
Yeah, you would think the law of averages would even out. Usually when you have two evenly matched teams, if you play them over a 10 to 20 game series, it's about 50-50. That is not the case in this one. So it is almost very defying all odds. And I don't know if it's magic, but it usually boils down to what you just said. Georgia makes a really weird call, and then Georgia doesn't make the plays, and Alabama does make the plays. Think about it like this in that second half. They made the call to go for it on 4th down. They didn't get it because Alabama stopped them. LT Overton made a great play. Don't forget they had a drop touchdown pass. They never recovered from it. Alabama had a drop touchdown pass on their first drive, and they still scored. So it's I won't say it's just all mental toughness, but it sure is strange how it always comes down to that. It's like Coach Stallings used to always say, the players play 50 or 60 plays for the privilege to play 5 plays to determine the game. And you probably could boil that down again to about 5 or 6 key plays. Alabama made theirs, and Georgia did not.
Well, that play specifically that you're talking about for us with Ryan Williams dropping the pass. Ryan Williams finished tied on the team with 5 receptions. I think Isaiah Horton also had 5 receptions. Jeremy Bernard also had 5 receptions. And Herbstreit was getting on Ryan Williams for his blocking a lot during the game. But Ryan Williams continued to play and overcome that early drop. And I think of a guy like Bray Hubbard in the game on Saturday that got so much flack for his play against Florida State. and how he's really turned it on. And you could kind of talk about Ty Simpson, where, I think Ty got a lot of unfair negative criticism in that Florida State game, just with the position that we were in and how good he's looked the past three games. And of course, the coaching staff and what they've been able to do against Florida State. And it kind of sets up well as you go into Vanderbilt. Not ready to quite get into our Vanderbilt discussion yet. But just how this team has kind of been a team of redemption, whether it's within the game or within the season so far. They've continued to rise and get past those negative plays and continuing to play together. And we definitely saw that in some of the videos that the university has put out, that AL.com might have gotten, or some of these other publications, that this is an Alabama team. Everything they talked about in the summer about being close and being a team, it really is playing out. It was questioned after Florida State, but this is a team that's really got each other's back.
I wouldn't doubt that one bit after these last three games. I mean, yes, there was a lot of uncertainty and concern after the Florida State performance because after all the talk that you heard, you just didn't see the proof. But I think you're starting to see that. It's funny to think that look, a third of the season's already gone now. They played four games. There's only two-thirds of the season left. Now look, there's a big challenge coming up now. Remember, same position last year. You come off a huge emotional win against Georgia, and then you just kind of fall down flat in Nashville. So I'm hoping that the concentration, the effort, all that remains. It's a gauntlet coming up. These next couple of games are going to be tough. I mean, you get Vanderbilt here for game day, then you go to Missouri. I mean, it's a big challenge. I'm very anxious to see how they respond, to see if they keep their focus. I think they will. I think we've seen that these last three games. But again, still have to see it next week. Still have to see it this Saturday and Columbia too.
Well, and I know a lot of what's been talked about too, or what we've seen a lot, was some of the play calling that we saw against Georgia and
Oh,
just the creativity. Caden Proctor being the first Alabama offensive lineman to technically get a rush, even though he caught the pass, similar to Andre Smith. And he was trying to tie Andre Smith and get that end zone. Jeremy Bernard had a play that he was going to throw and did not throw. We came back and ran it again, a different variation of Jeremy throwing it to Isaiah Horton for a first down. But that's some of that creativity that we have not Deborah and Grubb are known for that we haven't really seen yet. We've seen a little bit of it. We obviously saw the reverse screen to Ryan Williams in the Wisconsin game, but I give them a lot of credit because I think one of the criticisms too from the Florida State game is how tight that team looked. And when you've got plays like that in the playbook that you know you're going to run at some point or might run at some point, I think it allows the team to play a lot looser and be a lot more comfortable. And yes, they're playing to a standard, but it just seemed like they were more relaxed in being able just to play football than having to play to something else necessarily.
well, I think a lot of it plays in it too. The fact that week by week, more reps, more experience, more comfort, more knowledge of the offense. And I agree with you. We are now seeing what everyone thought they might see last year. This is the Washington offense that DeBoer and Grubb threw on everyone. The one that ran through the Pac-12 that got to the national championship game. So if this team keeps developing like it is, who knows what you're going to see by the end of the year? It might be a sight to behold because it was a joy to watch in that first half against Georgia. Look, maybe there was one or two plays. Maybe people were saying, "Why do we do that?" But at the end of the day, they did a great job. And look, they showed that you can have ball control in a different way than just running the football, which is, of course, what most Alabama fans are used to seeing. So this is a new look Alabama. This is not the Alabama we've become accustomed to over the last 17 years. So there's some adjustment, but they did prove it works. They controlled the clock, they controlled tempo, and they did it with the forward pass. They didn't do it with the running game.
Well, you talk about some of those plays that fans may sit back and, what are we doing? Why do we do this? And I think one of them that does come to mind on the defensive side was the first touchdown we gave up. And Cameron's got, Kane Womack and Coach DeBoer talking back and forth. And what I like from that scenario or how that played out is they also got Kane Womack taking responsibility for it as the team was running off. I think that's a great that builds a lot of trust or continues to build trust. I imagine there's a lot of trust already there between the players and the coaches. But I thought that was great to see his accountability and what he talked about in the Florida State game about we can't play timid. We're up 14 to nothing, and maybe it was an aggressive play call to go basically cover zero and to send that much pressure at Stockton, and Jackson gets his eyes caught in the backfield. But he was continuing to stay aggressive. And there's something about that that I can appreciate, knowing that you're not trying to play on your heels or trying to just play comfortable with the 14 nothing lead, that you're still trying to play aggressive and still trying to make plays.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how they do. Obviously, I know we're about to get into the Vanderbilt, but this week with what's coming up, so a totally different offense they've got to prepare for as far as what's coming. So I'm very anxious to see how the defense responds. It was not their finest moment last year in Nashville. How about that?
Last thing about Georgia, it was a game that I talked about last week that I felt like history could actually have an impact on it. The anxiety and the anxiousness from Georgia fans, if we get up early or have a lead, can we actually get over the hump? And as we saw, Georgia again fell short of getting over the hump. I think we're playing Georgia again next year in Tuscaloosa as part of the SEC already getting out some of that scheduling. If you're a Georgia fan right now, like what's going through your mind? This was the time to get Alabama. You could look at 2015 and say we're playing at home, but you still had Nick Saban on the sidelines. You still had Kirby Smart on the Alabama sidelines coaching the defense, and you had Derrick Henry and running back. You could have said it was the 2021 SEC championship game, but you had Bryce Young, the Heisman winner at quarterback, and you had Nick Saban on the sidelines. If you're a Georgia fan, I don't know where you pull any confidence that next year, years down the road, how are you going to beat this Alabama team? Because I still think it's not just beating Alabama on the field, it's beating Alabama in your mind that you can actually go and do it.
Well, you could tell after that was it 14 play opening drive where even though they dropped a touchdown pass and they still scored, when you had that drive, you could tell a little bit of air came out. Then they went at 14 to nothing. It got a little quiet. And then Georgia looked like they were back into it. And then that drive right before half to go up 24-14, again, the fans were just like, really? Again? I can't believe this. Look, Alabama, the way they've beaten Georgia, the last several times that they played, they they flipped the script. What was the thing that always got the Nick Saban teams? You had to have elite quarterback play and good wide receivers. Well, what did Alabama do? They've gone out and got good quarterbacks and wide receivers, and that's how they attack that Georgia defense. And as long as Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Gruber there, they're going to come up with something to go after that Georgia secondary every time they play. I think you're right. We play them two more times. I think we got them here at home next year and then back to Athens the following year. So we're going to have a nice little 4-year run playing Georgia. So it'll be interesting to see how part 3 plays out next year in Tuscaloosa.
Well, obviously, a ton of credit to the coaching staff, a ton of credit to the team. This was the game that people circled that the dynasty would either be dead or just didn't really think that Alabama would be man enough to beat Georgia in Athens. But they've stepped up to the challenge, and now they have another challenge, and it's being billed as such a great game that College Game Day's coming to town. I know everybody expected College Game Day would be in Tuscaloosa for Alabama Vanderbilt first week of October. It's not new College Game Day being in Tuscaloosa. Michael, I know you got some statistics on that.
Yeah, so for those wondering, Alabama's been on game day the second most time of any program, second to Ohio State. So this will be Alabama's 61st appearance on game day. Right now, they've got a 39-21 record as far as appearances on there. And I agree with you on this, though. If you would have said, college game day is coming to Tuscaloosa, that's fine, but you would have thought LSU. But you never would have picked Vanderbilt. And think about it like this, too, as well. This is only the second appearance ever on game day for Vanderbilt. And on top of that, you really potentially could have a Heisman Trophy candidate duel here with Ty Simpson and Diego Pavia. Again, I don't think anyone saw this in the preseason that this would be happening, this time of year with Vanderbilt. You knew Pavia was a good quarterback, but you had no idea that now you've got two strong contenders for the Heisman Trophy, at least at this point in time. So I was joking. Again, seems like some kind of multiverse incursion because this is something that you don't see. Well, you haven't seen this. This is the first time you're ever going to see something like this. So a pretty unique event. Hopefully, everybody comes out to see it in person. It's going to be a very interesting Saturday afternoon. How about that?
I'm my expectation, I haven't seen the layout, but my expectation is that game day will be back on the quad where it's been the past couple years. I don't know what corner of the quad you would really call that, but I know that's game day started on the quad when they were coming to Tuscaloosa. When our big game started finally moving from Legion Field back to Tuscaloosa. It was in the area where the game day tents are really close to the stadium. It's probably around my time at Alabama from 2007 to 2011 when Walk of Champions was completed and you had the statues being erected and all that, that they moved game day to being right there at Bryant-Denny Stadium. And then I know in 2019 it moved back to Quad for the game against LSU. I think part of that, from what I remember being told, was that was one of the games that President Trump attended. So for security reasons, needed to go ahead and clear out that area. But having game day should always be on the quad, in my opinion. The way they've got it now with Denny chimes in the background, and you still get a little bit of stadium, and you've got the president's mansion back there. It's picturesque. It's open enough where you can get a ton of people in there. I I think it's one of the best spots game day goes to as far as getting the whole college campus and not just the football stadium for the football game. So I'm very excited for game day to be back in that particular location, hopefully in Tuscaloosa.
It's a nice panoramic backdrop. It really showcases the beauty of the university. I know people are going to say I'm biased. Yeah, maybe I'm slightly biased, but I've been fortunate enough to go to other campuses, and not just in the SEC. Alabama, here in Tuscaloosa, we've got a very nice campus. It's very historic, it's very elegant, and it's picturesque. It really is compared to even other SEC schools and schools in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten. And look, with all this out-of-state recruiting, you get some of those kids from up north or out west, and they come visit the campus for the first time. They're hooked. That's one of the reasons. Another reason why you see so much of out-of-state enrollment. Once you get them on campus, they fall in love with it, and they want to come to school here.
Do you have a prediction on who College Game Day will go with as their celebrity guest picker?
No, we were joking on Tide Hoops history. We want Nate Oates, but I don't know. I have no clue who they'll pick. Uh, if tradition holds, they'll bring some obscure, I don't know, singer or something. I don't know. Now we've
Country
had
music
Sean
star?
Alexander in the past. Yeah, we've had Sean Alexander in the past, so that's a good one. I don't know if they've got another former Alabama player lined up to surprise us with. So I am curious to see who they bring out as celebrity picker.
I know Miss Saban did a phenomenal job last year, very successful with her picks, but I'm with you. By the time that this episode airs will be in October. So, and I think we will actually, when it comes out Friday, we will be exactly 1 month away from Alabama's first basketball game against North Dakota.
That's right.
And
That's right.
it makes a ton of sense that you would get Nashville, Nate Oates up there to pick Alabama versus the team in Nashville. So it makes a ton of sense, but I'm afraid, as it typically does, and I guess when you've been on game day 60 times and a lot of them being in Tuscaloosa, you get some obscure characters, but we will probably see some country music star that has some affiliation with Alabama, but is just there to be there for the weekend.
Just selfishly speaking, I'd love to see Nate do it because it also would help with recruiting. So I would love to have him on there doing that too
Yep,
as well.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we'll actually get into the Vanderbilt game, and it's a very, very interesting series, Alabama versus Vanderbilt. You look at the record books, and Alabama dominates the series with 63 wins, 19 losses, and four ties. That's not how the series started, though. Vanderbilt won the first five games of the Alabama series, dating back all the way to the early 1900s. And really, not until the 1960s is when Alabama really started to turn it on and start beating Vanderbilt on a consistent basis. Um, we're 35-5-2 at home, so that sets up well for this weekend in Tuscaloosa. But this has always been a game, at least when I was growing up, this was always a game that was in September, very early in the season, typically your first SEC game. So you probably did have a lot of games against Vanderbilt that where Vanderbilt was undefeated, not necessarily 5-0. Of course, we all remember the game where Vanderbilt was 3-0 in 2017, and their offensive lineman decided he wanted to get in a camera and say Alabama was next, and we put a 59 to nothing beat down on them in Nashville. But in the month of October, Alabama is 16, 11, and 4 against Vanderbilt. October has not been the best month for us to catch the Commodores. So that's some quick just how it stacks up as far as wins losses against Vanderbilt in the series.
Well, I think another historical fact too. This is the first time Alabama and Vanderbilt are going to play each other as ranked teams since I believe since 1937. So this is something that just doesn't happen. And then what we talked about is in my lifetime, Vanderbilt's only won three times, and one of the three was the year I was born. So I don't remember that one in '69, but I remember 1984, and I remember last year, of course. But it's usually a very rare occurrence. And you're right. Alabama usually used to play Vanderbilt in September, at least when I was growing up. That was usually one of the first games that they played. So there's a lot of unique things going on. It's an October game. And again, Vanderbilt and Alabama are both top 25 teams. If the voters honestly voted correctly, might be a top 10 showdown, but they don't have Vanderbilt up high enough. But I think Vanderbilt easily would not surprise me if they had gotten to like number 9 or number 10, and we would have had a top 10 based on how they've been playing. They've been playing great.
So on the fly trivia question for you real quick. There is actually an Alabama head coach, football coach, that was also the head coach at Vanderbilt. Do you know who that was? And
And Alabama,
that might be a little bit of a trick question, but he was head coach at Vanderbilt for a game.
and he was an Alabama head coach.
He was an Alabama head coach.
Ooh, for one game at Vanderbilt. Yeah, you got me on this one. Nothing comes to my mind right at the top of my head on this one.
Paul Bear Bryant was the head coach at
At
Vanderbilt
Vanderbilt?
for one game in 1940.
Oh, so he must have been an assistant and then filled in.
He was
Ah, okay.
he was an assistant. So when he was uh, Coach Bryant was an assistant for Frank Thomas at Alabama as a line coach. His next assistant job was at Vanderbilt that he accepted in 1940. The Vanderbilt head coach was recovering from an appendectomy, and Coach Bryant was the head coach of Vanderbilt for one game that ended in a 7-7 tie against Kentucky.
Oh, wow. All right. I know Clark Lee's got Birmingham ties. He was at Birmingham Southern for a year. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, he was there for one year. So there's a little connection there. Not a lot, but a minor one.
Fortunately, in 1964, which is one of the games that I wanted to talk about, it's when Bear Bryant was on the sidelines at Alabama. Um, that's one of the national championship teams that was considered or named national champion before the bowl game. We would eventually lose to Texas. And I'm going to put lose in quotation marks think if they had instant replay back in 1964, 1965, they would have seen that Joe Namath was clearly over the goal line against Texas, and we would have won that game. I think it would have been 23-21 or 24-21 at that point, pending an extra point. But Alabama started that season off with three home games, but all three home games were in different cities. Started at home in Tuscaloosa against Georgia, won that game. Started I'm saying it's a home game. It was in Mobile, Alabama. Beat Tulane, and then played Vanderbilt in Birmingham and won that game 24 to nothing. Led by Joe Namath's three touchdowns, one rushing. He had two passing touchdowns in that game. But that was a team out for Alabama that would eventually go 10-0, and as I mentioned, was named national champions by the AP. They voted on it before the bowl games. I know there's been a lot of flack with AP voters this week as it relates to college football, so maybe that ties in really nicely. But I still think there are some national championships we probably should not claim. I still say you claim the 1964 national championship because, as Namath said, we did whip Texas. We just didn't get credit for it.
Well, again, you go by the rules of the era. So the rules there at that point, most of your major services name the national champion at the end of the regular season. So it's a very legitimate national championship. And then look, the very next year, Alabama takes it the other way. AP changes the rules that they're going to name the national champion after the bowl game, and Alabama limps in, or not limps in, but it looks like they're not going to win it, and then they win the bowl game, and then they get named back to back post bowl game. So it works both ways. But there is no shame, and there is nothing saying that we should not claim 1964. It is 100% legitimate on that.
Do you think that's the first instance of rat poison at Alabama?
That's funny. I wonder if Coach Bryant was thinking that, but yes.
Well, transitioning to 1984, the 1984 Alabama head coach actually played on that 1964 team, Ray Perkins. He
Yep.
was the wide receiver at that for that team. But I know you unfortunately know some of that 1984 game and can speak to it a little bit.
Yeah, so 1984 homecoming against Vanderbilt. That is the first Alabama football game I got to see in person inside the stadium. So I actually had tickets for that. Had tickets to two games that year. The first one I went to, which was the Vanderbilt, of course, finished much better. That was the 17-15 game in Legion Field. But did go to Bryant Denny for the first time in my life. Got to see it. Remember, Bryant Denny only held about 59,000 fans back then. So there were no upper decks or anything like that. So looks a lot different than it does now. But I remember Alabama was up like 13-9, and the next thing you know, Vanderbilt scores three touchdowns in a row, and it's out of reach. Disappointing that year in '84. Again, they had not lost to Vanderbilt since '69. That was one of the precursors to the 5-6 season in 1984. So a lot of disappointment there. But I did enjoy the experience. And one of the things, this is really funny. One of the things I remember the most about the experience, because we were in the stadium, is the first time I got to participate in the wave. So that was the craze. That was the craze back then in the '80s. So we did the wave about 3 times that day, and I had a blast doing that. So that was a lot of fun. I remember that part. Unfortunately, I do remember Vanderbilt coming back, taking the lead, and winning. That was a disappointment, but that's okay. Made up for it at the end of the year at Legion Field when Alabama won 17-15.
You know, you talk about the upper decks not being built, and I'm actually old enough to remember Bryant Denny Stadium with only one upper deck and the other side not having the upper deck. My Uncle Baker, who you actually, met recently at one of the tip-off club meetings, he had tickets right there up against the fence. So that was always an interesting seat right there that you could look right over the back of the stadium, but then also have the football game right there in front of you too. What do you remember? Because I was reading a little bit about the game, and they were talking about how that was a low point in the Ray Perkins tenure. And he would have been 3, 4 years into it at that point. I don't want to call the loss to Vanderbilt a low point for the, I mean, if it's a low point for the Kalen DeBoer tenure, then I expect it to be very good the rest of the way with Kalen DeBoer, however long he's here. But what do you remember just as far as everything around Ray Perkins and the Alabama program because he was replacing Coach Bryant. And he obviously got another year after that too in 1985. But just kind of what was the feeling of Alabama football and Alabama fans at that point after you lose a game to Vanderbilt that you hadn't lost to in 15 years?
Yeah, so '84 was Coach Perkins' second season there. Obviously, when he came in '83, replacing Coach Bryant, he caused an uproar. He took down the tower. And the first season of a new coach, the imprint from the previous coaching staff is really there. It's still there. It's not really the new coach's team just yet. You really could see that in the second year. But I'll also say, let's be honest, there was a talent gap. There were a couple of missing recruiting classes that caught up to Coach Perkins, and that wasn't all his fault. He started recruiting at a really good pace, but that was really young talent. He was having to get in there. So there was a talent gap. In 1984, you had some unfortunate injuries, of course. Don't forget you lost Kerry Good. If you have Kerry Good for the rest of the season, he himself is going to get you at least 2 to 3 more wins, and you don't have a losing season. That was a huge blow. So you had injuries. You had some young talent, but it wasn't quite ready. You actually saw some of it really start blossoming the next year, and then another recruiting class right behind it with Bobby Humphrey. So it was really apparent that Alabama wasn't the most athletic team in '84, and they were going back and forth. Coach Perkins had not really decided on a quarterback at that point. He started Mike Shula against Boston College. He went to Vince Sutton. He went back and forth a few times. Vince Sutton played most of the Vanderbilt game, if I recall. And then finally, a couple of games later, Perkins made the decision to stick with Shula. You started to see it turn a little bit with a little more continuity. But again, there was a talent gap there. They did not have the talent in 1984 that people were accustomed to seeing with Alabama teams in the late 70s and early 80s. They just did not have the athletes that year.
Before we move on to the 2024 game, we talked last week about these annual opponents that Alabama is now playing. Auburn, Tennessee were not a surprise. We talked about Mississippi State and LSU. Um, didn't really touch as much on Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt was an annual opponent for Alabama for many, many years. I mean, I know in the 90s, it was Vanderbilt and Tennessee, you were always playing them out of the East. Um, I know Auburn's going to be playing Vanderbilt as one of their annual opponents, and I imagine there's a lot of history there. But then, as I just rattled off, between Alabama and Vanderbilt, 63, 19, and 4, there's been a lot of games there too. Do you feel like Vanderbilt should have been considered more as an annual opponent for Alabama in these first 4 years of going annual opponents um, for SEC in a nine-game schedule? Or do you think it really should have been between Mississippi State and LSU as deciding between those two of who that third team would be?
So I really think it should have been Mississippi State and LSU only because you had already broken the tradition years ago by not playing them annually.
Right.
Had we still been playing Vanderbilt, maybe even up to like 2 years ago as an annual opponent, then yes, I think there might have been a small case or argument to make for that. You're right. I grew up used to Alabama playing Vanderbilt every year. That's what I remember in the 80s and a lot of the 90s. When they went to the divisions, you're right. The Vanderbilt was an annual opponent out of the East along with Tennessee. But once they broke that away and Tennessee was the only one annual opponent from the East, you know, I won't say rivalry, but the tradition of the series itself had already been fractured, and now it's just, hey, we play Vanderbilt every few years. So I don't think it would have warranted that, at least in this discussion, this first go around for the three annual opponents.
Well, I know we were all shocked last year. I think a lot of it has to do with what we were coming off of, beating Georgia, being number one in the country, and still very much accustomed to the Saban area where we just didn't lose to teams like Vanderbilt. But you have to give Vanderbilt a lot of credit as far as how they were building their program. I know Clark Lease is a graduate from Vanderbilt. He's obviously very invested into it. They started off the year last year beating Virginia Tech at home. They had the loss, I think, to Georgia State. They were very much an up and down team, but we saw obviously in our game, and as they continue to play throughout the year, Vanderbilt ended up being a pretty good 6-6 team. They had Tennessee and Texas on the ropes as well last year. And one of the things that Vanderbilt had too last year coming to this game was they had a bye week before playing us. Now, they played Utah State last week. You still had to be out there. It wasn't a full bye week. How do you think that will end? How much do you give credit to that as far as helping Vanderbilt last year and pulling the upset and beating Alabama for the first time in 40 years?
Oh, no doubt. I think the bye week was crucial for Vanderbilt. They got an extra week of film study. They knew exactly where to attack that Alabama defense. I don't blame the offense last year for that loss. That was more on the defensive side. The defense gave up 33 points. I won't count 7 because of the turnover. Outside of that, that defense couldn't stop them. There were critical moments in the second half where Alabama needed to get the ball back, and they couldn't take it away from them. That's what prevented the full comeback in that. And look, Diego Pavia is a difficult matchup assignment for most teams, and they're playing really well. They're smart, they're disciplined. So I expect them to come in here and be ready to give Alabama everything they got, just like last year. So Alabama needs to come out and be ready. Otherwise, they're going to get another fight that they don't want to be in.
Vanderbilt had the ball for 42 minutes last year. You're just not, I don't care who you're playing. It's going to be tough to win games when your opponent has the ball for 42 minutes. And, Vanderbilt started the game last year with a touchdown. Our first offensive possession, we throw a tip to pick six. So you're in the hole 14-0, and the game's barely started. And we would have moments in the game to take control. And then we had two guys with the same number on the field for a punt return that gave them a first down. I think we had a roughing the passer that was questionable later on in that drive on a 3rd and 15. We had the ball with the chance to take the lead. And, one criticism I've always had of Jalen Milroe was for as mobile as he was and as much pressure that he got, he could never feel pressure and took a sack right to the face, fumbled the ball. Vanderbilt ends up scoring and extending it back to a two-possession game. So even with all that was going on, there were opportunities. We couldn't get them off the field on 3rd down, and we didn't capitalize last year. And Vanderbilt shocked the world and kind of announced themselves, and of course Diego Pavia announcing himself to the world as far as what he can do. And now you got Johnny Manziel that's coming to Tuscaloosa, going to be wearing his jersey. I'm sure Theo Vaughn will be on the sidelines. Um, some of that stuff, when you're not prepared for it, that can become a distraction.
Well, I'm talking about Johnny Manziel being on the sideline. I always think about 2015 when we had Peyton Manning on the sideline for Tennessee, and then Alabama comes back with the Derrick Henry run, and you had some other key plays. So I always remember the meme of his face when they show Alabama scoring. So I'm not saying I want it to be a one-score game and Alabama has to win it like that. It would be nice if Alabama can just come out, take control with their offense, the way they're playing now. Because what I did like, and we talked about earlier, what I liked from that offense was it's a ball control offense with a forward pass, and that's fine. As long as you can control the tempo and the time, no matter how you do it, I'm fine with that. This offense is a little more balanced, a little more diverse when it comes to the weapons. So I think we're much better equipped this time around to at least be on the field longer than what we did last year with the turnovers and the miscues and things like that. Now, again, I'm very curious to see what the defense does. I want to see if they've learned anything. All the injuries don't help either. So, it's going to be a tough assignment for the defense. So that's where I think the offense definitely needs to step forward and put together in one of those games again, like Wisconsin, the first half against Georgia. They're going to need that this Saturday.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the 2015 team because I feel like I bring it up every week trying to compare this team to that team and how that season started out. And look, after we beat Georgia in Athens in 2015, came home and had a sloppy game against Arkansas. If not for Jake Coker hitting Calvin Ridley on a deep pass late in the fourth quarter, that was a game that was going to come down to the wire. That Tennessee game, like you said, with Peyton Manning on the sidelines, had to have a late drive there to win 19-14. So if you told me right now we were win 19-14, I would take it,
Yeah.
especially with the stretch that we have. And this is, if there's one concern I have, not necessarily about the game, but maybe for this team, is there is a lot of talk about revenge or redemption and looking at what happened against Vanderbilt last year. But there's still so much more season ahead of us. And, as great as the win was last week, and I do think my expectation is this team has done a good job of refocusing and getting ready for this game. But then it's going to be getting ready and getting refocused for the next game and the next game and the next game. The season will not end win or lose, the season will not end next Saturday. I know it might feel it'll end if you lose and you're, 3-2 or 4-2 at that point, but the season will not end. And so my hope is you're not looking at this is our redemption spot. You got multiple redemption spots throughout the year, and it's a team that I do think will continue to improve and should continue to improve. And that's what I hope the focus is that they continue to improve week to week as we continue to make our college football playoff push.
Well, what you want to see is this team mature enough to do exactly what you said? Are they going to focus on the task at hand, which is not playing to whatever opponent name is on there, but to what they want to do themselves, to the standard that they want to do, and to the execution that they want to uphold. So, again, that's what the best Saban teams did. They were a machine. They didn't care who they were playing. They didn't care if it was a I don't know, Southern Conference team or an SEC opponent or a Big Ten team. They knew what they wanted to do, how they wanted to prepare, how they wanted to execute, and that was what they were trying to do every week. So, can this team do the same? So far, in the last three games, they have done that, but it's a long season. You got a lot more games to go, so it's a grind, and it's going to take mental toughness to be able to maintain that consistency week to week.
Well, and not to knock those Tide Machine teams of the Saban era. Um, But I feel like this is a team that I am feeling right now. It's really easy to root for. And it's always easy to root for any Alabama team, but just it's a little bit more with this team that I'm feeling right now because you see how much they enjoy playing for each other and playing for Alabama. And in this NIL world, and we've seen it, not just at Alabama, but at other schools across the country, where is the passion for the team really there? And I just get the sense from this team that they're playing for, the numbers on the side of their helmet. They're playing for the name across the front, not the name across the back. So I don't know what's going to happen Saturday, but I'm excited to watch them get back on the field. And again, it may not be the Tide machine that it was from the Saban era, where you're going to win by 4 or 5 touchdowns. But I know this has got to the point where they're going to give their best effort and represent us the way that we want to be represented.
Well, what the fans appreciate, yes, Alabama took a big punch in week one, but they want to see how the team responded, and so far the team has responded the way they want them to respond. So they keep showing that toughness and that resiliency. They'll be fine. The fans will be behind them all the way. They can lose another game or two games, but as long as they're fighting and executing and doing everything they can, fans may not like the loss, but they can accept the loss on those terms.
It'll be 2:30 Central Time, ABC, for those who are not going to be able to be at the game. So make sure you tune into that. College Game Day will start at 8 o'clock Central Time on ESPN. You want to tune into that, of course, to be able to see the picturesque, Tuscaloosa campus in the background. And I'm sure there will be multiple stories that they will do, not only on Coach Saban, but this team and maybe individual players as well. So gearing up for a very, very fun Saturday and hopefully have some more fun Saturdays to talk about as we get into next week too, when the team will be on the road headed to Columbia, Missouri for an 11 o'clock game. But we'll focus on this game first. Michael, any parting words before we shut it down?
No, just hope everyone shows up. Going to need a good home field advantage. Never thought you'd have to say that we need that for Vanderbilt, but at this point, you need it for every home game you got. So, everyone, if you got tickets, please come out there and watch them play. They're going to need the support.
Absolutely. And like I said, I think this is a team that's very easy to get behind and support. So be loud, create noise. That's one way to, of course, affect not only their team but Pavia and the offense. So it'd be great for us to get another offense to commit some false starts since we've seemed to do that on the road, which actually brings me to a point that I had completely forgotten about. Another fantastic thing that the coaching staff did, in my opinion, in the game against Georgia, we got away from clapping to do the snap count and went to the leg raise. Been asking it for years. Finally went back to the leg raise. I mean, we didn't have we had one false start, which was kind of a weird false start on Cam Dewberry at right guard, but it was obviously work, and we knew those 5 yards were precious, and not giving them up was key. And I think at the end of the game, that's the first time in Coach DeBoer's tenure at Alabama that we had less penalties and penalty yards than our opponent. That's been an issue that predates Coach DeBoer, but. Look, I give kudos to the staff. It's something that I've wanted to see for a while, so I'm glad they got rid of the clap and went to the leg raise, and it obviously was very successful.
Well, let's hope. Last week is starting a new trend. So let's go 2 for 2 and have less penalties and less penalty yards than the opponent.
And let's start a new 40-year streak or more
Yeah,
against
or
Vanderbilt
more.
on Saturday. So we appreciate everybody listening in. This has been the Tide Machine. We got a lot of things with Crimson Crossover coming up over the next couple of weeks. As we reference, we're going to be a month away from basketball season. So we're getting the Crimson Crossover podcast teed back up. We already had our first episode a couple of weeks ago. You've got the M3 show that's also cranking out more present day Alabama football commentary. Got golf adjacent, which just previewed the Ryder Cup. Not the best, for the U.S., but at least Alabama won and saved the weekend for everybody. So if you haven't already, like, subscribe to Crimson Crossover either on Twitter, on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're going to continue to be cranking out more content, and we've got some other basketball ideas that we continue to talk about. So be on the lookout for that. But we appreciate everybody's time. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
The Paul W. Bryant Museum is a captivating destination for sports enthusiasts and fans of the University of Alabama football program. Located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant. The Paul W. Bryant Museum showcases a remarkable collection of memorabilia, including trophies, photographs, and artifacts that span Bryant's career and the rich history of Alabama football. Visitors can explore interactive exhibits and learn about the team's storied past, making the Paul W. Bryant Museum a must-visit for any football aficionado. Fans can also experience exhibits highlighting success of both the Alabama men's basketball and women's softball programs. Open Tuesday through Sunday. Plan your visit today and experience the rich tradition of Alabama athletics. Roll Tide.